Hi, everyone. My name is Alejandra, and a lot of you know me online as Alejandra Quetzalli. I'm here today at the AsyncAPI Conference, and I'm super excited to be here with you all today. So thank you for having me, and thank you for your time. So you've lasted a whole day of the first very day here at the conference of the Contributor Summit. And my talk got scheduled to the end of the day. So if you're still watching, kudos to you. I'm glad you're still awake. And I'm going to do my very best to make this presentation fun and interesting and educative and useful for all of you watching, of course. So I do have a PowerPoint deck to show you all, and we're going to talk about how to contribute to Async API developer documentation. Some of you have probably already visited our docs, and that's awesome if you have. If you haven't, if you've never even visited our documentation, don't worry about it. There's plenty of time to do that. If you've already visited and you think, hey, you know what? I am here today at your talk, Alejandra, because today I want to get started as a contributor. I want to start contributing to all of the docs. Well, if that's why you came today, I'm excited. I'm so happy you're here and I'm ready for you. So let's go ahead and get started and tell you a little bit more about who I am, what the documentation looks like today for Async API, and we're just going to get right to it. All right, let's get started. All right, cool. So the first thing I need to do is actually screen share. So let's go ahead and get started on that. And as we just mentioned, today we're talking about how to contribute to Async API docs. And I wanted you to enjoy our beautiful little logo there. I know, I like the animation. Let's go ahead on to the next slide. All right, cool. So you may or may not have noticed and seen this picture of me before on social media. It's a favorite of mine because it has my service dog with me, Canela. And so she's actually really happy in real life, just like you see in that picture. Anyway, um, so what do I do? Why am I here, right? So I joined Async API here a very short time ago. I'm so excited to be working as an open source contributor with all of you other amazing people. And what I joined to do was to work on the docs and learning educational materials. So we have some tutorials right now, but we have so much more content that we really need to add. There's so much stuff that still needs to be taught in our documentation. So I'm here hopefully to do my very best in improving our docs, getting you all involved and giving me feedback, giving me your thoughts, your perspective, your ideas, your complaints, your questions, bring it all. And today, let's just think about how we can bring your creativity and all of your amazing ideas to help improve specifically our documentation. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started, but take a screenshot here if you want to throw me a question and GitHub directly. That's my handle. You can ask me any questions if you want to spin up a pull request and you're adding some docs. Maybe you're adding a README for documentation. Grab my GitHub handle and tag me into your pull request, and I will be there ready to help you out with your open source contribution for the docs. If you have any other questions that you want to send my way, my DMs, are always open on Twitter and on LinkedIn, so you can send me any questions you got. And if I don't know the answer to something, which I probably may not know because I don't know everything and I'm new to the team, I can find someone that knows the answer, or I can help you get started on our Slack channel asking questions and help find someone that can help you out. So, all right. So first of all, in case you didn't know, I do want to let you know this exciting news that actually earlier this very same year, the Async API initiative was actually moved under the Linux Foundation, which is super exciting because this can help maintain and guarantee the neutrality of the initiative, which is completely important in open source, correct? So thank you, Linux Foundation. And it's really exciting. This is like a new area of growth, a new stage, right? So in this talk for today, I'm not actually going to do a deep dive on the spec of our API itself, because I know that a lot of the earlier talks we had today in our Contributor Summits track already covered that. And we have other talks and a panel later where we're going to talk about what's coming up in the future and what spec changes can we expect to see for the next version of 3.00. And Fran, our director and the founder of this spec, is actually going to be in a breakout panel session for that. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And so because I already knew that we had a lot of other sessions that were covering introduction to the async API spec and how to start your first async API file and how to build your document with async API. I didn't want to focus on that for today. So for today, in this talk, we're going to either assume that you already have a basic high-level introduction to the spec or more or less what the initiative does, or I will definitely be happy to answer any questions later on if you think that I missed something. Now, what I will mention today, though, in our talk is that the Async API initiative is trying to make working and creating with event-driven architecture as simple, well, simple, right? But as easy as we work today with, for example, HTTP APIs. HTTP REST. We want it to be as simple as that. And the thing is, when we're working with event-driven architecture, there's a lot of different kinds of configurations that you might use. For example, there are a lot of different kinds of protocol information that is allowed. There are different options when you're using Async API. For example, as you see here in my slide, Kafka, WebSocket, MQTT, AmpQP. Really, there's all kinds of protocols. And if you've never worked with a broker or you don't really know the difference between a broker and a server or their similarities, don't feel bad. Feel free to throw me a question later on and we'll be happy to get back to you. But the good news is that we don't really need to get into that today to still be able to continue and teach you how to contribute to the docs. But I did want to just kind of like throw out there that because of the fact that with this spec, there are so many different kinds of options and how you can configure your protocol, as you can imagine, that also means that there's going to be many kinds of tutorials and many kinds of options and scenarios to document, right? WebSocket, for example, that you see on the slide today, we've been having a lot of people in our community recently ask us more questions about how to use our spec with WebSocket. And they've asked for tutorial. And we don't currently have a WebSocket tutorial, although it's, in the roadmap. We might write it ourselves, or maybe that'll be something that you help contribute with us. Who knows? I'm welcome to any of the above. But I'm just kind of throwing out there that we are really, in a way, at the beginning stages of this initiative. This initiative is only about 2 years old. And in such a young initiative, as you can imagine, even the docs are still at an early stage. There's so much information, so many different kinds of things we need to document. So let's go ahead and move on. And I kind of wanted to tell you a little bit about how the initiative has been growing. How are people communicating with us? How big is our community? And what are things that we're looking to change? So for example, currently as of 2021, when we checked the stats for today, we were, as you can see, at some pretty big stats for the website, which we're really excited about. 100,557. That's really exciting. We have 150 plus contributors in GitHub to date, and we have a lot of different repositories because we have a lot of different tools that we're working on. It's not just the spec. So when I mentioned the fact that we have about 150 plus contributors, this could be all across. It could be for the spec, it could be for the tools, it could be for documents, talks, what have you. It's just overall in general, the number of contributors that we've had for Async API initiative. And as I've been saying, if you want to throw me some questions, we do have a Slack channel. So we currently have 1,500 plus folks in our Slack channel. We have a whole bunch of individualized Slack channels for different kinds of questions or different feedback or things that the community might need from us. So if you have questions from this presentation, now you know that you should join us in Slack as well. You probably noticed that this slide is in Spanish, at least half of it, and that's because I've actually been giving some talks and for some folks from Latin America, and so I think I might have left this slide in Spanish, which is pretty hilarious. But basically, it just means the first line is how many unique visitors we've had to our website. The second line is contributors to GitHub, and the third line is users in Slack. All right, cool. Now, the other thing that I really wanted to talk to you guys about is that we also have public meetings in which we talk about how to contribute, and we also have individual meetings for folks who are just interested in this initiative and want to keep up to date with the latest changes and what have we been building for the last month, what are we working on for the next couple of weeks, what's in our roadmap, how far ahead we are in our roadmap, all those kind of things we talk about in our public meetings. And in fact, you can join those public meetings. They are absolutely open to the public, and I'll show you at the end of the talk all the different social media links and things that you'll need to join us so that you can add our calendar and our meetings to your calendar, and you're welcome to join whenever you want. We have currently a model of governance that is an open governance because we believe strongly in transparency and in openness. So if you'd like to hear more about that, our website has a whole section where it describes more about the model of governance that we chose. We also have a blog post on that, but I don't want to get too distracted from today's main conversation, which is just contributing to the docs. But our documentation are a part of the initiative. And if you have questions that you want to bring up about the documentation in our public meetings, please do that. We'd love to hear your questions. If you have questions about how to improve transparency and openness in our documentation or any questions about that, please don't be shy, send them our way. All right, so what's our agenda? We have some cool stuff that we're going to talk about. I want to show you the current state of our documentation. I want to show you kind of how we work on having documentation also in READMEs and individual repos. I'm going to show you how our READMEs and our docs look in there as well, not just our website for the docs. Then I want to walk you through this amazing methodology that has completely changed my life. And this is the Diátaxis method. And it basically teaches you how to divide your engineering documentation content into more or less usually 4 to 5 top agnostic content buckets. Now, we don't want you to feel limited. It doesn't have to be 4 buckets only. But once we get to that section and I explain to you how this methodology works and how we are going to apply it to our AsyncAPI docs, I think you'll understand where we're going and how you can help contribute with this new idea that we're bringing forward to our information architecture of the site. Now, we also want to tell you about community feedback because feedback isn't just about the spec or the tools. We also want feedback about the docs. So I'm looking forward to you, the community, to send us that feedback. I'm going to tell you about contributions. How do you get started as a contributor, right? That's the whole point of today's talk, how to get started as a contributor for the docs. And we will cover that. And I'll also show you how you can find our contribution guide, because of course, every open source project has a different way in which they like to handle that. So I'm just going to go ahead and show you where you can find that one for our project. All right, so current state of the docs. Where are we at today? Well, if you go to our website and you go to our navigation and you click on the learning, the drop down is going to show you currently 4 sections, and you can see them right here: getting started, tutorials, async API specification, and then we have this coming soon section for use cases. So there's a lot of things there that I actually want to change. And one of the main things is even just the fact that it says learning in the navigation. So I think that we need specifically something that says docs, right? That is really the best practice to let people know where the docs are. Just label your navigation item docs. So we're going to be changing that to where learning will instead read to docs. And then when you look at the drop down, instead of showing those current options that you see, we will instead be showing you the new content buckets that we will be restructuring our documentation into. And we'll get into that more in just 1 second. Now, I want to go ahead and move on to the next section of the docs. Like when you click from getting started in the navigation to one of those sections, as far as the user experience is concerned, it takes you directly to what you're looking at right here on the screen. The URL changes from asyncapi.com/docs/ in this case, getting started. And then it doesn't really have a homepage introduction or a landing page or just a homepage to the doc site. That just doesn't exist currently, right? It just takes you, boom, straight into the introduction, and ready or not, here we go, right? So we want to change that up a bit, because a proper doc site should have a homepage that explains to you what you can expect to find in this documentation site, and it should show you the main content buckets that we will be targeting, so that you can then kind of figure out what your learning path is or where you need to go from there. That's definitely a much better user experience, and it'll be better to navigate for people that are new to this API spec and don't really know where to get started. Now, the other thing I want you to notice is I want you to see how in the right hand navigation, it says on this page, and we have one header, and it's showing select your next chapter. So the other thing you're going to be looking at is improved headers and more detailed content, so that when you're looking at a particular documentation page and you go and look to the right, and the navigation items on the right should make sense and should be able to show you what that doc page covers. And we want to have improved headers, which will then of course make an improved navigation, because the headers are what feed into the right hand navigation. Now let's go ahead and move along, and this is actually a screenshot from the the framework that I've been mentioning earlier, Diátaxis. And this is the methodology that we're going to be applying to our docs. And this is a new way that we are going to think about content buckets. And I want you to think about this as agnostic as you can. And I know that that's going to be hard. I know, but for today, that's what we got to do. Okay, so according to this methodology, at a high level, for the most part, all engineering documentation can be reclassified under 4 main content buckets. So for example, here we're looking at tutorials, how-to guides, reference, and explanation, or some people call it concepts or something similar. What do each one of those cover? What are they for? Reference is going to be things such as your CLI or your API spec and your individual API endpoints. If your product has a CLI, you're going to document how your CLI works under reference. Now, explanation or concepts. So that's going to be something more along the lines of, it's really more words, engineering diagrams, and lesser code snippets or tutorials. So this is more to explain to your audience specific terms, specific spec details, and perhaps new features of your product. If it's a product, you have a lot of features and terms to introduce to your audience. In this case, with AsyncAPI, perhaps we need an entire documentation page that is an explanation of the concept broker. We saw earlier that we have a lot of protocols that we can use to configure our AsyncAPI file. Well, perhaps we don't want to assume what our general audience does or doesn't know. We don't want to assume how much you do or don't know about what a protocol is or what a broker is. So we would be adding additional concept pages that explain to you what those terms are. And then you would also be looking at extra engineering diagrams, because these engineering diagrams are so priceless in documentation, because a lot of us are visual learners. And it isn't until we see that diagram, that picture, that cartoon, what have you, that makes it click for us. So it's vital that we explain concepts in our product or API, whatever it is that we're writing about, but we're also must absolutely add engineering diagrams that'll help with the educational component. Now, I know you're probably wondering at this point, what's the difference between a tutorial and a how-to guide? I mean, it sounds pretty similar. I don't get it. Don't worry. That's actually a very common question I receive, and I'm happy to tell you more about it. So when you see a tutorial, I want you to more think about a beginner task that somebody needs to do when they're first getting acquainted with your product or your API, or your platform, whatever it is that you're documenting. And it doesn't mean that this is, for a beginner audience. That's not at all what this is about. It's not about how advanced you are or not as a technical person. This is about, hey, I've never used this platform before. So teach me the basics of your platform to get started. As you can see, that has nothing to do with being a technical or non-technical person. That's just tutorials are learning oriented to get you started on the first typical things you're going to do in this new product or technology that you're documenting. However, a how-to guide is for documenting more specific, detailed use cases or troubleshooting guides. What do I mean by this? Well, let's say, for example, that you're onboarding someone to a new database. If this is a completely new customer and they're new to your database and perhaps new to databases as well, this is really going to be more of a tutorial scenario. So it would really be more like, hey, I'm going to write you a tutorial for how to create your first MongoDB database. Now, let's imagine, however, that you are currently a user that has, I don't know, perhaps a local side project, and in your project, you've been using Mongo for your database. Well, maybe tomorrow you decide that you don't want to use Mongo anymore, and suddenly you've decided to change your whole project and change your database. And so you're going to be migrating all your data from your original Mongo database to your new database provider, whichever one that might be. So at that point, this is beyond a tutorial. This is a specific how-to troubleshooting guide of, you know, that migrating data from one database to another is going to involve a much more detailed use case, and in fact, probably some troubleshooting steps that you will want to alert your customer to. So as you can see, this is far beyond the scope of a tutorial. This is absolutely a how-to guide. So hopefully that kind of gives you a better idea of the difference between tutorial versus how-to guide and how to use those two content buckets more effectively. So if we go back and I show you a quick screenshot of our current content buckets here, you can remember perhaps that we have the content buckets so far of getting started. Then you can see there tutorials, specification, and community. And then under community, it says tooling. That's a little bit weird. I don't really think that we need a bucket that says community in the docs, unless it's actually because we have a whole section dedicated to showing how to do community contributions, for example. But in this case, all that content section leads you to is a huge list of different tools that the community has contributed for AsyncAPI. So in this scenario, we won't really be needing a content bucket named community, right? That doesn't really make a lot of sense. Getting started, there are a lot of docs that like having a section called getting started. It's not about limiting yourself. You know, nobody's saying that you have to limit yourself to only 4 content bucket ideas because of that framework that we've just been discussing so far. You can definitely do it your way and adapt the methodology to you and your product or your technology. In our case, what we're going to do is we decided that we needed a conceptual explanation section with more engineering diagrams where we deep dive into what all of these terms in our spec mean, but we still will maintain the bucket of tutorials. We're going to be adding now a how-to, which, as you can imagine, based on our earlier explanation, how-to will be for more specific use cases and troubleshooting guides. We're going to have reference, of course, because we have an API. So we need to document our spec and anything API related under that reference section. But as you can see, we're actually proposing 5 content buckets instead of 4. So the more we saw the content and our particular use case, we felt strongly that because our open source project has so many tools, we really did actually need another section that was dedicated to documenting just the different tools that we have and how each one works. So in our case, it made sense to adapt that methodology to have 5 content buckets. And now you can see that eventually, as I work with any of you amazing fellow contributors, we are going to be restructuring the information architecture of our doc site into these 5 new sections, and new content will be going on subsections underneath those main content buckets. All right, cool. Now I want to talk about the contribution guide. And so let's go ahead and show you some of that. All right, cool. So let's go first to AsyncAPI. And I want to take us to the main homepage of our docs. All right, so if you go to github.com/AsyncAPI, here's our initiative. I created this README and I feel very proud because it's, quite beautiful, as you can see. So I recommend you go here first if you want to get started with us. I mentioned to you earlier that we have a lot of public meetings and that you can join those meetings to learn more about where we're at the roadmap. And also you can throw your questions about how to contribute to any area you wish. In this case, I hope, docs. So what I would recommend is if you want to get started and working with me on this, you want to go ahead and join our Slack workspace. And once you join our Slack workspace, you can send me any questions you want about a specific contribution, for example. I also really recommend that you join those public meetings. And so here's the link to those Zoom meetings, and you can add, your calendars and join our mailing list. We have a newsletter, lots of cool stuff. Here are our contributing guidelines, which I mentioned we wanted to talk about. So I mentioned that we wanted to talk about our contribution guide. So as far as the specification contribution guide, here are the specifics if you want to contribute, for example, to the spec. So if you wanted to propose some change to the spec, this is the main contribution guide that'll detail how to do that for you. If you're wondering more about how to contribute individually to the docs, excuse me, the pause there, I was trying to find the link, then I want you here in the README to actually scroll down here to contribute to AsyncAPI. And then right over here, it says you should also check out our contribution guide. So you click that, and that's what's going to open right over here. And so this is the document that we just opened. The first one was how to contribute to the actual spec. But if you want to contribute to the tools, there's also this other one. So let's go ahead and click on this one. And even though we're not talking about contributing to the tools, this workflow of the contribution flow actually applies to documentation. So this is the next thing I wanted to show you. So when you're contributing to AsyncAPI, we have basically the following contribution flow that we request that you respect and follow as well. So first of all, if you want to do something for the docs, let's say you realize that you're dying to help contribute a WebSocket tutorial. So the first thing you got to do is you open an issue. Where? Well, actually, I'm going to show you here in AsyncAPI. In our case, if we're talking about the docs are actually in the website repo. So what you want to do is, if you wanted to contribute to the docs, the first thing you got to do is open an issue, right? So you go here to the website repo, and then you go to our issues right over there, and you see here the button, you create a new issue. If you're doing something for the docs, in this case, it would be feature request. Although we are currently working on a template issue that will be specifically for docs. So I'm going to be soon after the conference actually having here, hopefully, a template new issue just for the docs, and then you can just use that one to get started. But until we get that out there, for now, you can use feature request. And so you open that new issue, and after you've opened a new issue and you detail, hey, I want to propose that we add a new tutorial for how to use the AsyncAPI and WebSocket protocol. Maybe you already have an idea of how to get the tutorial started. If that's the case, go ahead and move on to the next step, which is after that issue has been approved, then go ahead and open a pull request with your work, with your proposal, with your contribution. Tag me in that documentation pull request with my GitHub handle and say, hey, Ale, here's my pull request. Can you take a look at this tutorial? Let me know what you think. And then, of course, I will add any other folks that we need to add to the documentation pull requests. But for now, all you really need to worry about is adding me, since I'm the main owner and I can get everything else started. So after your issue and pull requests have been approved and everybody says, wow, your contribution looks good to go, we are ready to merge this, then the next thing that will happen is that your changes will be merged by us, the main contributor team, and then they'll be published on the next release. Now, in the case of the documentation, once we merge a pull request for docs, it actually is automatically pushed live. So in your case, you'll get to see your contribution live probably much sooner than other sorts of contributions. So that's exciting. Of course, we have a code of conduct which applies to working and contributing. So we really do request that you're respectful and read the full text of the code of conduct so that you can be nice and pleasant to work with. All right, cool. So we talked about our contribution guide and how to get those links and information to get started. I also want to tell you about community feedback, because community feedback is absolutely priceless. So here's the thing. There's all kinds of way in which you can give us community feedback. As I said here, if you were to join one of these channels, you can leave us feedback in Slack. You can give us feedback in our Zoom meetings of all the public meetings that we have with our contributors. You can send us a message, what have you. But you can also send us information via an email if you really wanted to. If we go to our website, there's a contact form section. Let's find that as well. No, not a contact form section. Here we go. GitHub organization. So the other thing that I wanted to show you was how to leave or start a discussion. So we have GitHub community discussions so that you can leave us direct feedback via a discussion as well. You can start a whole discussion thread and get more attention to help prioritize something that you would like to propose to be contributed or to be done. So if you want to do that, then you're going to want to go to our community repo. So our community repo is where we actually have been hosting discussions publicly. So you just go to AsyncAPI, community repo, discussions, and then here you see that we had actually some discussions going on for the recent hackathon that just happened in October, and our upcoming conference that was happening right now, which is why you're watching this talk. And then I opened a section for discussing things or questions related to docs. If you want to open another discussion thread about documentation, please go ahead. If you have more questions, we have all these other options, general ideas, question and answers. So there's all kinds of ways in which you can give us your community feedback. Oh yes, this is a screenshot of the of this. I started bring your AsyncAPI docs contributor questions. So I started this discussion thread, which I just mentioned. So after this talk, if you want to continue this discussion that we started today, please go ahead to this main discussion number 90 in our community repo, and then just go ahead and throw your questions and join the thread. That would be amazing. I would love it. Okay, community contributions. So we already saw our contributor guidelines. We already learned about the contribution workflow and how that works. But now you're probably wondering, okay, so you told me, Alejandra, what are some changes that are coming to the docs? You told me that we can tag you in pull requests, but I'm still not sure where to begin. How can I start contributing to the docs, Alejandra? I know that you told me to create an issue, but what else can I do? So don't you worry. Another thing that I actually wanted to show you was, I'm going to go back to our main organization in GitHub, and then I'm going to go to projects. And if we go here to AsyncAPI docs, we have a board here. So I created this board, of course, public board. And this is the board where we're keeping track of more or less most of the work done for the docs. If you create an issue, then you can go ahead and add labels of docs or documentation enhancement. And then by doing that and tagging me in your issue, we'll go ahead and add that card to either changes coming or in progress, community pull requests under review, or done, what have you. So if you're yourself are looking at, hey, where do I get started? How do I contribute, Alejandra? I feel kind of shy. No worries. You can look at some of the upcoming changes and things that we want to bring on board and maybe get an idea from that. Now, right now, we did mention that one of the biggest changes is this redesign of the information architecture. We're talking about changing the main content buckets for our async API docs. So if you have an interest in helping us in this move, what we're looking at doing is possibly the following. What we'll most likely do is I'll probably just create a Google spreadsheet that has a list of all the tasks needed to reformat and move all of our docs over to these new content buckets. And then I can share that spreadsheet publicly with you folks. And then you just look at that spreadsheet, you take a look at the list of GitHub issue tasks, and you just tell me, hey, I can pick this one up. And then that's how you start contributing. And that's how you can help us actually in making these changes to the docs. The other thing I wanted to tell you guys about is, and I'm going to head over here right about now, is you're going to see that we don't just have these docs here in their main site, but I did also mention earlier that we have here individual READMEs and documentation, as you can see, even inside of our repos for our tools and the spec. So another way to contribute to the docs is not just by writing documentation, as you could imagine, but we're actually going to need a lot of help doing refactoring work. And refactoring isn't really necessarily rewriting or editing. We're talking about moving things over. So for example, I mentioned to you that one of our new content buckets is going to be for documenting our tools that we have. Now, in this case, Modelina that you see here is one of our tools. And I wanted to show you an example of the work that needs to be done and moved over to the actual documentation site. So we go here to Modelina, and Modelina main README shows you how to get started. And then there's a documentation section, right? So it says all the documentation for this library, this SDK, can be found under our main documentation README. We click on that README, and it's actually this one right here. And we see that Modelina has a whole library just for docs. So here's all the documentation for this particular SDK tool. And the docs, I forgot the word in English, you know, this directory. The docs directory shows you a README that details what is inside of the documentation of this repo. So currently, all of this documentation for this tool Modelina is only inside of this repo. So some of the contribution work that we'll be needing as well is the refactoring of copy, pasting, and moving content that currently only lives in repos into our new docs site. And so that's great news, because if you are newer and maybe you're a budding technical writer, or you're new to contributing to open source, and there's always those people that are still a little bit newer, a little bit shyer, and a big issue would terrorize them. They might feel that that's not something that they are capable of doing. But something as simple as copying and pasting, as we refactory things and move and copy docs that we have in repos also to our doc site, that's something that any beginner can do. You don't have to be afraid about, breaking changes or anything. We're here to help you. And so this is another great task that I'm going to be adding to that spreadsheet of all the tasks related to this huge information architecture change to our docs. So that's another great task. We're going to be moving over a lot of docs that currently only live in READMEs to our main documentation site. And, we're going to need you for that as well. Now, this is a framework that I've been talking about to you that we're using to inspire us. It's Diátaxis, as you see right here, .fr. And here's that picture that we saw earlier. But more importantly, if you're curious about who has adopted this framework for their engineering documentation, I would recommend you checking these guys out. You go over here and you can see a list of all the different projects right now that have been using this framework. I can give you an example right here, actually. So for example, we go here to, I'm going to show you Gatsby. So Gatsby is actually another one that completely restructured all of their content buckets under this new methodology. And you're gonna start to notice that maybe you've seen this before in other documentation sites, but perhaps you hadn't realized it. Here we see tutorial, how-to guides, reference, and conceptual guides, right? Just kind of like what we were talking about earlier. If you heard of Fuchsia, which is created over at Google, we're looking at their doc site and look at how they have basically those same main content buckets. They have get started, guides, concepts, reference, and in their case, they have a contributing section. Actually, did you know that NumPy, of all things, the NumPy is also using the Diátaxis framework. The Django is using it. WebSocket is using it. So there's like a lot of folks, that are picking this up, and we are excited to join the cause. All right, so I think that now you have a much better idea of where our current documents are at and what the roadmap is for improving our docs. And this is open source. So we are so excited to see how many of you folks would love to join us and help contribute to the docs. I mentioned earlier that you should connect for any questions. So there's our GitHub or Slack invite, Twitter, LinkedIn. You have any questions? You let me know. Again, thank you so much for being here with us today. I had a really great time and I appreciate you. Bye.